Welcome to the weekly Tiger Club of Kansas City meeting on this call for Tuesday, September 28th. I'm Darren Whiting, Vice President of the club, and joining us today will be Soren Petro, host of the program in the coveted 2 to 6 p.m. weekday time slot on Sports Radio 810. First, we want to apologize to Soren for having to work with the fill-in today. Our regular professional host, Mark Fitzpatrick, who does a fantastic job here each week, could not be here today. We look forward to having Mark back next week. So, because it takes more than one of us, we're also going to have Paul Blackman jump in when he can. We want to thank each of you who are here today for joining our live call. That means you have renewed your membership to the Tiger Club and our help to support Mizzou athletics. If you have a question for Soren, please feel free to add that to the Zoom chat feature and we'll get that to him. If you're watching on a repeat on our social media channels, please consider joining the club by visiting kctigerclub.com, where you can join us live in the future as well. So all that said, Soren, thanks for taking your time right before you go on air and chatting with the Tiger Club today.
I appreciate you having me. It's always an honor. I'm always impressed with the passion of the Tiger fans, and I think this club is one of the best ones out there. I think I tweeted it out the other day, the best lunch club in Kansas City. I can say that. So it's always great to get the invitation.
We always appreciate that. So let's start with the good news from this weekend. It looks like Chiefs coach Andy Reid is back after a health scare this weekend, and it looks like he's back.
Yeah, and I think that is, certainly first and foremost, right? His health overall. And, I think it's a bigger story than maybe it's getting the coverage of, to be frank. They say, there was speculation that was just dehydration. The people that were speculating that on Sunday are good reporters that I'm sure had sources on the inside that that's all it is. But the Chiefs refused to identify what exactly it was yesterday on our Zoom call. They brought forward one of the executive vice presidents who said, hey, complimented everybody on how the situation had been covered, and then said, we got great news, Coach Reid's out and he should be back in the complex today, and then took no questions, never did actually say what happened. When I asked afterwards, when it's all said and done, they shut everything down, and then we get a chance to talk with one of the individuals of the PR department. And when I had a chance to do that, I said, hey, we didn't get actually what this is. Can you tell us what exactly this was? And they refused to answer at that point. And so I thought that was, a little bit odd. I don't think it's anything. I think it's just Andy Reid's a very private person and he doesn't want any information out there, but it leads people to speculate. And when you have a coach that's, over 60 years old and, all through training camp was wearing circulation hose on his legs, I think sometimes people are a little more fearful. So I don't know that it was, I think there might be a little more apprehension in Chiefs fans than maybe there could have been had the Chiefs been a little bit given a little more information yesterday.
What's Andy like to work with for the media? He comes across as a very affable. Of course, he's everybody's favorite coach. What's it like for him, kind of behind the scene?
Andy, let's he's the Godfather. Let's not miss the point that he's in control, man. He's the man, and everybody in that building knows it. And I think he does a good job when you see him just when the cameras are rolling. I mean, I think that's the image he wants to present. And I think that is a facet of who he is. I think there's no doubt. I think he's an affable guy. Everybody that works with him speaks extraordinarily highly of the man. And so that can't be lost. And I think that should be remembered by everybody out there, that, the people you work with, if you're good to those people, that's the true test of the character. What are people like when the cameras aren't rolling? And by all accounts, he's outstanding to work with. So I think that is, first and foremost, that everybody just gushes over with Andy Reid. I like my conversation with Andy Reid. I think I've got, as good access as maybe anybody else out there. And I can tell you on the one-on-one, the guard does come down a little bit, and there's no lack of confidence, right? I'm not saying he's arrogant, but Andy Reid is well aware of where his stature is in the game, what he's accomplished, what he's capable of. And so I don't want anyone to think that he's just this, jovial grandfather that's kind of backed into some lucky situations. Everything Andy Reid has achieved, he's achieved by his design and his planning. And I think he understands every level of the game of football, right? Everybody has strengths and weaknesses, and he does as well. The personnel side is one that, is a knock that gets him. I actually think he's better as a personnel guy than people give him credit for, but maybe not quite as good as he thinks he is, right? And I think that's probably true of all of us in some ways. But he is a no nonsense guy. And if you do your job, then he will be there and he will support you. And I think that's why so many good people have wanted to be a part of the Chiefs organization. And I think that's been a key to his success. One, he can identify talent and develop it in his assistant coaches. I think also talented people want to come work around Andy Reid because they know they're going to be treated well and they know they're going to advance, whether it's in this organization or somewhere else. And so I've had some people say, well, why do you want, Andy Reid's always pushing his coaches to go someplace else. He should be trying to keep them here. That's not how you get good people. You'll very quickly dry up the talent pipeline if you aren't letting people. And I think everybody in business knows that, probably more than we think about in sports. But if you dry up your talent pipeline, you're just not going to be any good. And I think that extends over to the players as well. I was talking with some folks about Josh Gordon this past weekend when it started. We knew he was going to come about and maybe the Chiefs were going to make that move. And, one of the things that was told to me was Josh Gordon wants to play with Patrick Mahomes. Josh Gordon wants to play for the Chiefs. And so, I don't know that Josh Gordon is a Kansas City Chief if Todd Haley is the head coach. I think the want to play for Andy Reid is success, but also his coaching style, but also to play with Patrick Mahomes is a big part of the reason why Josh Gordon's in Kansas City.
What onto the game? Unfortunately, we have to go now. I'm gonna compare a little bit the Chiefs to Mizzou and ask you to do that next. So we'll get to Mizzou here quickly. But while we're on the Chiefs, you were talking people off the ledge yesterday after the 1-2 start. What are your thoughts? How can you talk us off the ledge, Soren?
Yeah, and I think and we did that. I heard all the Insta fire that comes immediately after the game, and the immediate reaction you're getting on Twitter during the end of the game and as it's over, and I think that emotion subsides. I pointed out that I put out a tweet in the morning. What do you think the Chiefs' record is going to be after 17 games? They've come out of the gate slow. They're 1-2, and early on there was 9-8, a couple of 8-9s. Take out the jokes of 1-16 and those kind of things. And there was some 13-4s, but it was more in the 8, really 9-11 win range. And as the day went on, it was funny. 12-5, 13-4. People kind of started calming down and maybe taking a bigger picture look. And I think they are fine. Listen, they have self-destructed in each of the last 2 games and had a chance to win. We quoted the stat, and you and I were talking about it before we got started here. Curtis looked it up. Teams coming into yesterday that had 4 turnovers and 0 takeaways were 2-83. You're supposed to lose that game. And yet there they were at the end with an opportunity to win, which speaks to how good Patrick Mahomes is, Andy Reid, and I think the offense as a whole. So it's not to say that there aren't things that have to be repaired and improved upon. There are, but I do think that, this team is still in good hands. And, if these games had come after an 8-1 start and they'd fallen to 8-3, there wouldn't be the panic. The smaller sample size makes people react in a much more aggressive manner. And there's still a lot to like about this team. Defensively, they got better. Willie Gay Jr. is a player that hasn't gotten on the field yet. I think Chris Jones is ultimately going to make his way back to defensive tackle, which will improve the team in that fashion. I think Steve Spagnuolo is a guy that knows what he's doing and is also willing to admit mistakes. And, he's going to have to get the younger, more talented players on the field. I think that will happen as the season progresses. And he's always been better in the second half. That was true his days with the Giants, and it was certainly true in 2019. Even last year, they got better as the season progressed. But, this isn't a team that chronically turns the football over. They generally take very good care of the ball. I think they will get back to doing that. And I do think Josh Gordon is a really big addition if there's anything left in the tank. He's that big physical. He's what people wanted Cornell Powell to be, that 6'3", 225-pound wide receiver that can just kind of box some people out at the goal line, but give a bigger, more physical target. And I think he can play outside, which can allow Tyreek Hill to work from the slot. In the opening game, when he had 10 for 198 and a touchdown, he actually had 7 for 165 and a touchdown from the slot. And I think that's a place where he can really, you can get some mismatches against what is usually the nickel corner and be very effective. So it's not just whatever stats Josh Gordon's going to bring. I think it'll be exponential, the effect, because you have to account for him, which should open up Travis Kelce, Tyreek Hill to work in positions where maybe they have a chance to be even more successful.
All right. Our special guest host is also here as well. So Paul, before we transition to the Mizzou here, I don't know if you have any questions for Soren about the Chiefs. Feel free to jump in.
My wasn't working. I couldn't hear everything, but I hear Soren every day, so I pretty much know his voice. And I think whether it's Mizzou, Chiefs, anything, people panic, or at the other extreme, they see something good the first week, and we're going to the Super Bowl, and or we're going to the SEC championship game. So I don't know how you're ever going to change people to, to be more rational and take games one at a time, and know that last week's result doesn't guarantee next week's result. So that's not really a question so much as I'm just kind of confirming what I think is Soren's position.
Listen, I think it's a fair point, Paul. And I do think that people have to understand that, right? That and we do it in our own lives. I think your kid has a bad day at school or a bad paper or acts up or doesn't, clean their room up. You don't throw the kid out like, well, that's it. We're done. We tried, but we failed, send them off. I think we all have much more perspective, but when it's sports, it's our release, and fan is short for fanatic. And so you don't have to have any checks and balances. No one's giving you a grade on what kind of fan you are. So you can go off the deep end as long as you can keep your friends around. I think we all have some friends that's like, I ain't watching a game with that guy because, he's just annoying. Like he has no perspective, but short of that, yes, that's how fans react. I think the good news is Andy Reid and the Chiefs won't react that way. I don't think Eli Drinkwitz will overreact. He and his staff will overreact to one game. And I think certainly with Andy Reid, there's a track record. I'll never forget when they went 1-5 in 2015, and people may think, well, that wasn't any big deal because nothing was going to happen with Andy Reid. They actually, they'd come off a 2-14 season, hired Andy Reid, had a surprising 11-5 year, then started 7-3, came in at 9-7, missed the playoffs his second year. And now here they were sitting at 1-5. And before Andy Reid came, he had about a 4-win year with the Eagles. So you were looking at this kind of track record of him that the game had passed him by. That was one of the narratives. And he was a mediocre coach. And at 1-5, he strode to the podium and said, look, I'm not going to tell you how we go about getting out of this because I've never been here. I don't have a blueprint for being 1-5. I've never been 1-5, but I can tell you we will get it fixed. And we will get this thing going in the right direction. And they went on to win 10 regular season games in a row and then win the first playoff game in however many years. And so I think when you have that sense of accomplishment, and while it may be a new situation, Andy Reid had that experience and background, we as fans can only remember last week, right? That's why they say you're only as good as your last game. That's a statement that's really true of the fans. It wasn't true of Andy Reid that day, and it won't be true of Andy Reid and the Chiefs or Eli Drinkwitz in this football team.
Right. I want to switch to a rules discussion with you a bit, mostly pro. I do see this a bit in college. And it's probably, I might be the only person on earth that feels this way, but about fumbling. Fumbles have always been a part of the game. And if you are careless and you drop the ball or a really good tackle, and the ball comes out, fine. That's always been the game. But it seems like in recent years, you see more of what I don't like, which is punching the ball out with your fist, or coming from behind and tomahawk chopping, karate. I mean, we don't allow kicking a ball out, I don't think, but it just seems to me that that's probably something, and I'm not sure exactly how you would regulate it, but it just seems it's different, and I don't like it. And I just wonder what your thoughts are on that.
I think I get it, because like, is that what we want to see is turnover, or do we want to see the offense? Most rules are always geared towards making a more offensive game, which is where people want. But my reaction to that would be, it's kind of like prohibition. There may be a reason to ban alcohol because the bad side of it, the people that can have a couple of drinks or what have you, it's fine. But the bad side of it's so bad, it needed to be done away with. Yet they found out that there wasn't a way that they could actually prohibit it. They couldn't keep it from coming in, and people were going to do what they were going to do. And I don't know how you would, legislate it. I mean, they same kind of thing on prohibition. They couldn't figure out how they could actually stop it. I don't know, how are you going to stop it? You're going to tell people you're going to stop the game even more. I think American sports has a problem with replays as it is now. I think NBA games at the end are painful to watch because every out of bounds in the last minute and 20 seconds of an NBA playoff game is stopped. And, there was a game this year that I think there was less than a minute left, and it took 38 minutes to finish an NBA game. And I think there is something to the European model. Formula One races start, they go, and nothing stops them in the middle of it. They run in the rain, all the things that go along those lines. And that's the most popular form of racing out there. The number one sport in the world is soccer. They don't stop except for at halftime. They play the game. And, that's a challenge for advertisers, but I think it's also the mindset and the attention span of fans. And so I think you have to be careful about over legislating any sport and stopping the action. And I don't know how you could regulate this without constant replays, which I think there are already too many of in football as there is.
Well, but they have taken measures to stop targeting, stop leading with the head. There are some things they've done. Now, granted, that's more of a safety issue. And clearly, if you put your helmet on the ball, it comes out. But that's always been done. I'm just talking about using your fist and pointing. It just, I don't know. I'm probably the only one who feels that way, and I just don't like it. But it's kind of like I've always thought that in basketball, committing a foul is supposed to be a bad thing. So it seems to me you shouldn't be able to weaponize that. So if you foul at the end of the game, the other team doesn't want to shoot free throws, let them have the ball out of bounds. Again, I don't think you should be able to take advantage of doing the wrong thing.
Stunning, Paul, that you're a lawyer.
I would say that.
And that you want to adjudicate the game, right? I'm stunned that this is your approach to things. Listen, I think you should certainly write a letter to Roger Goodell. He certainly loves to get feedback. I know he's so accessible to the fans out there. I'm sure he'd be happy to take it under consideration and perhaps implement it in the next 20 to 25 years.
We're talking with Soren Petro from 810 WHB. And if you have a question, for Soren, please feel free to add it to the chat. Soren, we're not at the end of the program, but I want to do a knockoff of your final 4 questions that you have for your guests.
Okay.
So let's compare Mizzou and the Chiefs. So you ready for 4 quickies?
Yes, sir.
Okay, that's what you ask your guests. So I want to make sure. Who's closer to being undefeated this year? The Chiefs, close losses to Baltimore and San Diego, or Mizzou with close losses to Kentucky and Boston College?
I think I'd have to go with the Chiefs just because of the track record and the pedigree and the history that they've been there and done it. I think we are seeing a little bit of kind of the yin and yang. They may have gotten away with a couple of games last year that now the ball's just not bouncing their way. Patrick Mahomes doesn't make a lot of bad throws, but he has made them when it was a critical time in these games. And I think in professional football, and certainly when you have Patrick Mahomes, it's easier to overcome a defense that struggles to stop the run. We saw what Boston College did. Really, they had a plan, and it was clear as soon as they took the ball that they said, this is going to be the last possession of the game, and we're going to take this clock all the way down, and we're going to live or die on this one possession. And I think that's harder to do in the NFL than it is college football. So I would say the Chiefs.
All right. And your everything seems to even out category. Who came closer last year to less wins? Mizzou with last second wins over LSU and Arkansas. The Chiefs with an overtime win at San Diego and a victory on the road at the Raiders, and maybe another one or two. So who was closer to having a couple less wins?
I think, Connor Bazelak was certainly a great find for Missouri. And I know he didn't have the big statistics, but we saw how he stabilized the quarterback position, and that helped. But the game of football is a passing game. And I think if you want to win close football games, you need to have that quarterback. So any team that has Patrick Mahomes is always going to be the one that's got the better chance to win those games. So I would say that Missouri was closer to having more losses than the Chiefs.
Okay, staying on that theme of outstanding quarterback play, which interception surprised you the most? Patrick's no-look interception or the interception on first down and overtime in Boston?
I did.
I would say probably Patrick Mahomes, just because he doesn't throw them that often, right? And I think also the fact that these guys know that he can make those no-look passes. He does it in training camp. He does it in practice. I think there's I saw some of the chatter was like, well, he's got to stop those no-look passes. Those guys don't know the ball's coming. They do. They know. I mean, that's one thing. I remember Mike Shanahan, when John Elway came into the league, we hadn't really seen that kind of velocity on his throws. And so they had some drop balls. And I remember there were some questions, around with Dan Reeves. But then when Mike Shanahan came and took over the Broncos, and they're like, does John Elway throw the ball too hard? People always wanted to, try to find a way. And John Elway's a great villain, I think, in sports. When he played, does he throw the ball too hard? Is it not catchable? Is that a problem? He's like, listen, if they can't catch it, I'll find different guys. And I think there's a little bit of that with the Chiefs. And frankly, the surprise is, why is Marcus Kemp 4 years later still on the roster? How have you not turned over that spot on the Chiefs roster? I know he's a great special teams player, and I think that's the answer. But I'd like to see some prospects that maybe have a chance to developing into more productive wide receivers. And why is Marcus Kemp the guy that's coming across open in that situation? That clearly, if Marcus Kemp could get that wide open all the time, Marcus Kemp would play all the time. That was clearly something that Andy Reid cooked up, and partially because, if we're going to leave somebody open, let's leave Marcus Kemp open. But if you're going to be out there, you have to catch that football, and he didn't get it done, and it was a critical mistake.
So who took the best step forward on our final question? Spags defense or Steve Wilkes Mizzou defense? We saw improvement in both of them, I think, a little bit. Who do you think made the best step forward?
Yeah, I might. That's interesting. I definitely think they both progressed. Wilkes seemed to, the thing that surprised me, particularly on the final drive, was that he didn't dial up any kind of blitzes. I mean, it seemed apparent that BC was going to get theirs all the way down the field, and he just kind of played it straight. I'm not looking at an all 22 and examining every play. And so I apologize if Coach Wilkes wants to say, well, actually on this one, and this one, but it just seemed like he kind of played it straight up and just accepted his fate almost. And I will say that at least from Steve Spagnuolo's point of view, we saw him dial up the blitzes late. We saw him coming with safeties and linebackers and trying some different things, and even coming with some run blitzes in an effort to try to stop the run. That being said, there's a lot more time that Steve Spagnuolo has with his team to try to dial those things up. And so for Wilkes, it's a much bigger hill to climb. I mean, anyone who's you've coached Pee Wee football, basketball, volleyball, soccer, I don't care what it is, you know that, like, you look down at your watch and, oh my God, practice is over. And you had 3 or 4 different things you wanted to do. And then you also know that you've looked down at your watch and it's the 7th practice and you're still working on something you worked on the first day because they still haven't got it, right? Well, these are college kids, not 5th grades, 5th grade boys and girls that you're coaching, but there's still an element of that you're still trying to get through, guys. And a lot of those guys get weeded out before they get to the NFL. So I think you've got a much more captive audience and more time to work with at the NFL than what Steve Wilkes does at Mizzou. So I think the easy reaction would be to say the Chiefs, but I without more information, I wouldn't say definitively that Steve Wilkes just hasn't had maybe a higher hill to climb than what Steve Spagnuolo has.
Okay, we talked a lot about Andy Reid, a former coach at Mizzou. Actually, obviously not head coach, but now we got a new head coach, different level, obviously, of an experience than Andy Reid. But what do you think about Coach Eli Drinkwitz here in his second year?
Yeah, I love covering this time of Missouri football because Eli Drinkwitz fascinates me. He's a rock star coach as far as the way he's going up the ladder, and that's always interesting. There are guys that pay their dues. They're at this spot for 5 years or 10 years, or he's the exact opposite of Lance Leipold at Kansas. I think it's just a wonderful, for me, contrast in 2 guys. One guy that's been kind of behind the scenes but progressing very quickly as a behind the scenes assistant. Another guy who got the head coaching job very early and has put in a lot of years at a couple of different stops and had successes. And how do they attack it? I have been, I can't obviously get down to Columbia all the time for the press conferences, but the pandemic and the Zooms gave me an opportunity to hear more of his press conferences. And I've been very impressed with Eli Drinkwitz. I think he's organized. I think he always has an answer. He's witty, which is a sign of intelligence. And his answers, I think, are very thorough. He has seemingly what did he call it one day? I can sit and give you, he didn't use cliche, but one-liners or something. He goes, I can sit and give you one-liners all day, but at some point we've got to go out and play and win. And I thought that was a great point. He kind of heard himself going through all the coach speaks that he's picked up all along the way, but they all come with merit. And he always has one. No matter what he's asked, he's got something that I think he's been an incredible student of the game and an incredible student of the coaches that he's worked around and under. And he's brought all that there. I think he is a melting pot of football information. And I think that's a great thing to see. Ultimately, it's going to be wins and losses, right? I think he may have miscalculated a little bit for the first time when he made the comment about not wanting to play in Boston. And I think it was a completely innocent comment that you'd certainly understand what he's talking about. And he said, we're not getting anything out of this recruiting wise. You completely understand it, but I think it did maybe fire up Boston College a little bit. Like, oh, the SEC school. I mean, I know I would take it if I were their coach and say, oh, the SEC boys don't think they want to come down here and, come out here to Boston College and play in Boston. And there's nothing for them out here. The only good football is in the Southeastern Conference. And, who's Missouri anyway? Anyone in this room ever been to the state of Missouri? I can see the rallying cries that would come from that. So that was a minor miscalculation, I think, on his point. But I love when I talked to Will Harris, who we're going to have on today, who's a football handicapper, and he called Eli Drinkwitz as a play caller. He said He's aggressive to the point of being destructive. And I think that's great as a young play caller. How much do we really know, right? He hasn't had that many years in the seat where you can really grade him, but I'd much rather have a guy that's pushing that envelope and going too far, that gets his hands burned a couple of times and realizes what's too far and then settles into this is the right amount of aggression. You know, we heard that from Brandon Staley talking about their going forward on 4th down and the 2-point conversion. He said, I thought we were aggressive, but I didn't think we were reckless. And reckless is one of the words Will Harris has used about Eli Drinkwitz in his time at Appalachian State. And I think that's fine because I think it's easier to flush out the mistakes. And when you've gone too far, you learn from that. He'll learn from that quickly and settle in, as opposed to a guy that's just captain conservative. Vic Fangio with Denver, who I know is off to a 3-0 start, albeit against teams that are collectively 0-9, but is off to a 3-0 start. And he's a guy that's always going to punt on 4th and 1. He's going to give it back to Patrick Mahomes. He's not going to make those decisions that you need to make in the modern game. And I don't think that'll ever be a problem with Eli Drinkwitz. I think his aggression will win more games than his recklessness will lose. And so all those things, I think he sounds great. His assistants I've heard sound like smart guys, that he has made good hires. You know, it's not the easiest job. It's definitely not the hardest job. So all these things are going to have to come together, and he's going to have to apply it and create success at Missouri. I just hope that he isn't a victim of his own success last year. And if he does, maybe, you know, lose a couple of games, like we said, Boston College that he could have won, if those don't mount up and it's a 6-6 year, 5-7 year, and fans start to then, you know, really turn away from him, I think you got to give the guy at least 3 years before you can really get a gauge on what he is. But I think all the returns away from the field are outstanding, and the early returns on the recruiting are very good. I think, you know, now we just need to see, you know, he needs to turn those into wins, which I think eventually he will do.
And the offense with Connor Bazelak and Tyler Beatty, just really they're in the top 20 in many categories, probably a top 20 offense, good enough to have won those 2 close games. Tyler Beatty's carrying a lot of the workload. What are your thoughts on him making it through an SEC schedule?
You know, like as a Missouri fan, I would quote Dick Vermeil, who said the football's not heavy, right? He should be fine. You know, if you're his, you know, his mom, you might say, hey, you know, give him a break. Let's let somebody else do it. I think ideally, I think we found over time, you know, I've covered the Chiefs long enough to remember Greg Hill and Marcus Allen and people complaining that they didn't just run Marcus Allen every time, that he's not getting a chance. He's got to get into a rhythm. A running back needs 25, 30 carries. And if you do the math on that, you'll quickly find out every running back that does carry it that often is quickly out of the game. And so there is a limit to how much, you know, any one individual can take. I think the game is more spread out. I think it's important to get running backs involved in the passing part of the equation, where they're taking on one guy and not taking on 3 at the line of scrimmage. And he's a physical runner. And so I think it is something to watch, and somebody else does need to step up and hopefully, you know, take some of the workload off. But I think where the damage will be done will be his career after Missouri. I think if the goal, frankly, is to get the most out of him at Missouri, you don't worry about how many touches, because I think at his age, he'll survive it. But, you know, every hit comes with the risk of injury. And so you want to develop more guys than just him. But I know a lot of people that thought, hey, with Roundtree gone, I don't think Beatty can carry the load. And now we're 4 games into it and talking about, you know, is he doing too much? So I think there's probably a guy who's pretty good behind him that we just haven't seen as much of, that if they need to go to someone else, they'll be effective. And I do think the running back position is largely there's a vision that comes with it, but it is, we're finding out certainly in the NFL, it's a very replaceable position. And if you have the quarterback first and foremost, but the offensive line, the receivers, those are the spots that really will take your offense to the highest level.
We'll move on to talk about maybe the conference realignment. But Paul, I know you were in Boston. Any thoughts, questions for Soren based on your visit to the area? I know you were very impressed with it.
Yeah, that, and I also want to, I've had a lot of people ask me to ask about some realignment. But first, Boston, I have to say to those of you who haven't been there, it's terrific. I would have liked to have seen the game turn out differently, of course, but Boston was great. Took in Fenway, see the Red Sox and Yankees Friday night. Huge Mizzou turnout there. It was even on the scoreboard. Great turnout in Chestnut Hill. The weather was supposed to rain. It was beautiful. There was nothing to complain about except the final interception. But I thought the Tigers showed well. BC's a good team. Yes, they played 3 under par teams to start out. We'll see how good they are against Clemson when they go down there next Saturday. And we'll find out a lot more about us when we host Tennessee and see how that goes. But I thought Boston was a great trip, and I would encourage people to have a chance to go there to do so. I don't
I want to build on that because I thought it was interesting, what Eli Drinkwitz said about it, and I do get it. But, when I went to Syracuse, we would always play a pretty good non-con schedule. That was something that we were known for back in the day under Dick McPherson and then Paul Pasqualoni. And we'd play at NC State, at Tennessee, at Michigan, that we'd always schedule those games and go there. And those are some of the best memories I have as a fan. And it continued after I was, out of college. I saw Tom Brady lose to Donovan McNabb at the Big House, right? Like that's one of the best football memories I have is watching Syracuse win at Michigan. And I think that's one part that I think will be interesting. Paul, you mentioned you had a great time at Boston going there, and having that weekend trip, particularly when it's a Saturday and you have the Sunday get home, it's harder with the Chiefs when you're, and now especially they might flex a game to Sunday night. I know when went down to Dallas, we didn't come home till Monday because we didn't know if they were going to flex the game to Sunday night. And so don't have a night flight coming out. But on a Saturday, you can maybe roll out Thursday night or Friday morning, take in everything that's going on. And I would encourage Eli Drinkwitz to have his games where he can go and recruit. But I mean, those is particularly when your team is good, getting a chance to go root for your team and see another part of the country and experience all those things. Man, I think all programs should do that, right? Get up and winning first. The old Bill Snyder schedule, the directional schools, and build the program. Yes, but once it's up and running, giving your fan base a chance to have a great weekend, like hopefully a lot of Tiger fans did in Boston, I think is an important part of the equation as well.
I think that also people don't remember that this game was scheduled probably 7-8 years ago when there was a mandate to get another Power Five. Well, Boston College was down. Missouri has a habit of doing it. We scheduled series back in Woody Woodenhofer and Bob Stahl with Indiana, who was horrible, except for the 6 years we played them and we eked out one tie out of. So, future scheduling doesn't guarantee much. But I think he was not wrong in mentioning that we don't recruit up there, but you get a good site. I guarantee if Missouri would play Washington in Seattle, people should go. It's a great trip. Mm-hmm. You're not going to recruit in Washington either, but I think it doesn't hurt to have that on the schedule once every 3 or 4 years.
I do look forward to what Eli Drinkwitz is going to say about 24 when it rolls around, and he's got Murray State, Buffalo, Boston College, and at UMass. Yeah. That should be an interesting press conference.
I have a question that again, other people have asked me to ask you, but I'm curious myself. When the Big 12 lost Oklahoma and Texas, so their first pronouncement was they had a powwow. They said, all right, unity, preaching unity. We're going to stay together. That's our best way forward. And then followed up with inviting BYU, UCF, Houston, and Cincinnati. No sooner did they announce they were joining than KU's AD says, well, we're not conceding it. We'll see. All options are open. And then just today, K-State's athletic director made a similar comment that, we're not saying everything's done just yet. If you're Cincinnati or the other three, are you anxious to sign your name on the dotted line? It's kind of like when David Bourne said Oklahoma's not going to be a wallflower, which was exactly what caused Missouri to then turn its attention to the SEC. If I'm those 4 schools, I'm not so sure I want to join something where the others are still looking around.
I think, so to answer the question directly, I think there's a lot to unpack there, but to answer the question directly, yes, I think those 4 schools can't wait to sign their name, and they will sign their name because there's no downside to signing their name. If those other schools leave, are they in a better spot than they were? They can always go right back to where they were. The AAC cannot be like, we're not taking you. We've got an offer out to James Madison. Like, we don't need you anymore. They're going to welcome them back with open arms. People may not remember, I believe it was Boston College and San Diego State, or not Boston College, excuse me, TCU and San Diego State actually signed on to be a part of the Big East at one point. When the Big East was, when Syracuse and Pitt were leaving for the ACC, the Big East was going to try to grab all these schools, and then that ended up falling apart ultimately, and San Diego State stayed in the Mountain West. They weren't kicked out. I'd have to go back and look at how that conference was going to work, but it was going to be basically a national conference that had teams that are now part of the AAC, teams that were part of the Mountain West. They were going to try to take the best of the rest and put it together. And I think that will always be the option. We see who is now the royalty of the non-power four, let's call it. I don't think it's a power five anymore. It's a power four. And it is, I think, by market size, it's the four that they're adding. It's probably BYU, to be honest with you. BYU, because of their religious orientation, doesn't have an opportunity, I don't think, ever to get into the Pac-12. But as far as any league outside of the Big Four, they'll all always want BYU. And so then after that, it might be Oklahoma State, it might be Kansas because of the basketball brand. I think if the schools break away, if the power schools break away from the NCAA, you're going to see the basketball brands be a lot more valuable than people think. And I think that's one of the reasons why Kansas is hedging their bet, because I do think that they are still in play for the Big Ten or anybody else because of that basketball brand. In particular, if the idea is to get out of the NCAA or at least keep the basketball revenues, then Kansas becomes a lot more lucrative. I mean, all the conference television contracts for football don't add up to what the NCAA contract is. And so now that includes the small leagues and things like that, but just the power leagues in basketball, there's a lot more money there than people realize. It's just that the NCAA still controls all that money. That's the problem. The money that's generated is there for basketball. And I think the basketball revenue is greatly underrated and will be a big topic in years to come, because I think that's what's going to happen. The SEC and Pac-12 and Big Ten are going to say, we're not playing in this tournament, and giving all the money to be funded out for the MIAA to use. And the MIAA does get money from the NCAA tournament. None of their schools play, but that's the NCAA's operating budget. And I've talked to the commissioner of the MIAA. They're very afraid of that happening because they know how much money goes to the NCAA and eventually trickles down to the smaller leagues like the MIAA. So I think that's something that's, definitely in play in the future. But to your point, no, I think Cincinnati and BYU, Houston, and UCF are happy to sign because there's no negative, right? And even if a Kansas would leave, or a Kansas and an Oklahoma State would leave, are they still in the best league? Probably so, carrying that Big 12 and then grabbing, Boise State and San Diego State, grabbing a couple more schools is the direction they're going to go. But I will say this, I would probably, if you would give me 2-to-1 odds, right? I bet 100, I win 200. I would bet $100 that the 12 schools that are supposed to be part of the Big 12 never actually line up and play. That never actually comes to fruition. I do think that, now there's no rush for the Big 10, ACC, and Pac-12 to expand. They can just sit, take their time. But after they take their time over the next 3 or 4 years, I think they will recognize where things are going. And I think you will see them go pick the schools that they want to increase their numbers. And, I will say, first, I'll say, you may recall, I remember standing on the stage there at the Westport Flea Market and talking about the fact, when Mizzou left and you had KU and K-State and Big 12 fans that were upset at Missouri and talking how it was a terrible decision and saying that, listen, I think it's the only decision Missouri can make. I think it's the right decision for where things are. And I think the Big 12 is doomed and that it will not make it in its current form. And so if you're Missouri, you really had no choice if you had an offer but to take it. And I think that's proven to be a reality. And I think that Kansas is going to get a long look from the Big Ten. I would say, I'm trying to phrase this in the right way, they're not going to take Kansas with that football stadium. But let's see if we don't hear a lot of chatter about a football stadium being upgraded at Kansas. And let's see if that process gets going, if we don't start hearing some conversation about Kansas maybe being in another conference, and that conference being the Big Ten.
Soren, it's been nice as a Mizzou fan not to have to sweat through this conference realignment, but I think a lot of us still want Kansas City to do well. A lot of Mizzou fans,
Sure.
Kansas City want the conference to do well and stay. But one of our members has been dying to ask about Tony Kornheiser's reference to the Big 12 as spoiled meat. What are your thoughts about that?
I think Tony Kornheiser is probably spoiled meat when it comes to his takes. I think he may have, soured a year or two ago and settled into the 60-second clock, 10 seconds on each subject. I think that's an easy way to get there. So if that's what you're trying to do is simply titillate 10 seconds at a time, then, okay, I get it. But I think there is always going to be, I think there is room for a fifth conference. And I think that what they've done, what they put together, well, I don't like the travel and I don't like it for any sport other than football and basketball. This is a conference that right now, according to the rankings, is better than the Pac-12. It's frankly better than the ACC. Clemson is at 25, and that's a gift. Let's be honest. I root for an ACC school. I'd like to beat my chest and say the ACC is the equal of the SEC. It's not, and it's a dismal football season right now. It's a competitive middle, but they don't have a power team at the top, and they don't have a lot of teams up at the top. So, that's what I would expect from a guy who probably doesn't watch 25 minutes of college football on a Saturday, who has consumed the Northeast. I bring Bob Glauber on, who's a tremendous NFL writer, Hall of Fame NFL writer. But, I ask him college football questions just to point out how little New Yorkers actually know about college football. And almost no one in New York, short of a gambler, has any idea of what's going on in college football. And to a lesser degree, but certainly much more so than what we see in Kansas City, that's true in Boston, Philadelphia, all over the Northeast. Professional sports rule the roost. And so I put very little stock in what that media environment has to say about college athletics. And so I think it's like I said, I think it's a cheap line just to try to get a reaction from some of the people in the Midwest, and frankly, to play to quote unquote his base in the Northeast of pro sports, who they want to think that they're a better sports fan because they follow pro sports, and college is for amateurs. I do think the Big 12 will be a better league. And listen, I think for Kansas, I mentioned I do think the Big 10 will be in play. I'm not going to say it's going to happen, but I think it is in play, and it is a possibility for them. And I think Kansas would have to take a long, hard look and say, do we want to be, the seventh best football program in the Big 10, or do we want to be the number one basketball program? And year over year, be 1, 2, or 3 in basketball, but have a real challenge. Or do we want to be definitively the number one basketball program, Gonzaga style, UNLV style from back in the day, and maybe the third best football program in the fifth best league? And I don't know that wouldn't be better. And listen, I don't know that there might not be a day that, Kansas is going 10-2 in a lesser football league, but the fans are having a ball and they're traveling and they're going to bowl games. And if Missouri settles into where they're consistently, hey, 8-4 is as much as we can hope for in this new league, where we've got to go up against, Texas and Oklahoma as well now, that you don't say, maybe that would be better. I don't think that'll be the conclusion. But I think for Kansas, that's something they need to seriously examine. Even if the Big 10 does offer, are they not better as an athletic department saying, look, splitting the state with K-State, fighting with Mizzou on the other side for talent, proximity to talent. We look more like these schools in this Big 12 and potential Mountain West schools that we would add, or AAC schools. That's a better fit for us. I think that's a real question. That's great if you get $38 million as opposed to $19 million. But if it costs you an additional $50 million to compete for that $38 million, are you really money ahead?
We'll finish with some Royals questions in a moment, but one of our members says that Connor Bazelak has kind of been referred to as a game manager as opposed to a difference maker. What are your thoughts on? He's put up great stats this year, and again, the offense has been good enough to have a couple more wins and be undefeated. Really, what are your thoughts on the game management tag for?
Well, I think it gets a bad rap. Alex Smith didn't like being called a game manager, and I think that's too bad, because I think game manager's right below game winner. And there's only a handful of guys that are real game winners: Patrick Mahomes, Aaron Rodgers, Tom Brady, Russell Wilson. And that might be it in the NFL right at that level. After that, they're good quarterbacks. I don't think Josh Allen's a game winner, but like, if you don't have Patrick Mahomes, would you take Josh Allen? Sure you would. Justin Herbert may prove to be that guy. At this point, he's certainly a candidate. He and Josh Allen are probably the two best candidates to do it. But Lamar Jackson is not a game winner. He's a game manager. And when he doesn't manage the game well and throws interceptions, they lose. When he does manage the game, he gives his defense, the guys around him, a chance to win the game. And so I think, number one, the term game manager should be appreciated for what it is, because quarterbacks that don't manage the game are disasters. So you have to achieve that level to then go to the next level. And I think last year that would be accurate. He was a game manager. 7 touchdowns. I think it was 6 interceptions. You can't say he was going out and slinging it all over the yard and winning games, but he was young. And now this year, 10 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. He's starting to be more of a game winner. He's starting to make those plays that it takes. Touchdown passes, I think, are the best indicator of what a quarterback can be. You can throw for a lot of yards, but if you're constantly settling for field goals, what good is it? He's getting the touchdowns now, and I think taking that next step. Would I call him a game manager now? Probably yes, but would love to have seen him get the ball. And because he failed in overtime against Boston College, that's another reason to kind of say he's more of a game manager than a game winner. But I would love to have seen what he did with 2 minutes and 30 seconds and 2 timeouts and a chance to go down the field and get the touchdown, trailing 4 in regulation. That's really the mark of a guy who's a game winner. And, I think you can win a lot of football games with game managers. In fact, national championships have been won by game managers, right? So I don't think it's a negative. I think what you don't want are guys that can't manage the game, because every game winner manages the game. It's just that every game manager doesn't always win the game.
Let's move on to the Royals. Just a few minutes left with Soren Petro from 810 WHB. Jim asks, how are the Royals going to juggle Mondesi, Lopez, Witt, and Merrifield? And what does the outfield look like?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think it certainly involves one of those guys in some way, shape, or form if there's not going to be a trade. I think the Royals, Jim Bowden going into the 2013 season, in between 2012 and 2013, the Royals won 72 games in 2012 and 13. They'd win 87 games or 83 games. I can't remember what it was. Anyway, he said, listen, it's time for the Royals to make the trade that hurts. And they're going to have to move some of these prospects. They've done a great job of getting young talent to the big leagues, but now they're going to have to finish the roster off. And it was that offseason that they made the trade for James Shields and Wade Davis, and they moved Will Myers. And that was a very controversial trade. A lot of people, we'd become prospect hounds as fans. That's all we knew, because we knew we didn't have anyone good at the big league level. So we hated to see our precious prospects go, because we always counted on that being, what was going to pull the Royals out. And at some point you got to get the guys that can play at the big league level. We know that trade was a tremendous success for the Royals. And I think that might be in the offing for a center fielder this year. That's what they really need. Andrew Benintendi's under contract for another year. I think it'll be interesting to see, do they extend him? Do they trade him in some kind of deal to get another outfielder? They have a very good problem. They have depth at catcher, which is something that's coveted. With MJ Melendez coming behind Salvador Perez. Perez has shown that he can still hit at DH. In fact, hit even better at DH, so that's encouraging. Melendez has played some third. They're talking about him being in the outfield. The athleticism of Mondesi says that he should be a very good outfielder. We know Whit Merrifield can play out there. I think it'll be interesting to see, does one of those guys go in a trade to bring a true all-around center fielder, a Lorenzo Cain that can go get it but also hit? Does it go to bring a frontline, starting pitcher? And they just say, we're going to re-sign Michael Taylor and have the defense there. They don't have the guy in the system for center field. That's the one spot that they've really got to find, unless it's Adalberto Mondesi or unless it's Bobby Witt Jr. They're the kind of athletes that you could move out to center field and they could have success. Mondesi would seem to be the more likely choice because he's proven he can't stay healthy on the infield. But if I had to guess, MJ Melendez in right field, I think Whit Merrifield's earned second base. I think Nicky Lopez may very well have earned shortstop, although I think there's reason to believe that his bat will regress a little bit next year. So Bobby Witt Jr. at some point next year at short, Mondesi maybe getting first crack at third, and Benintendi in left, and some kind of trade with depth of starting pitching, maybe Nicky Lopez, or maybe it's Mondesi and somebody else is manning third, but a trade made to get a center fielder in here.
So much more we could talk about, Soren. NIL, downtown ballpark, so many things. So we'll have to have you back. But let's finish on the Royals talk. Salvador Perez tied for the lead in home runs, I believe, broke Johnny Bench's primary catcher record, leads the league in RBIs. You just gotta, at his age as a catcher, you just gotta love the season Salvador Perez is having.
Yeah, I think it's phenomenal. And he had every year hit more home runs each year of his career until he hit 27 in back-to-back seasons. And then, of course, we had the pandemic last year, but we saw the power really took a jump. And you're like, oh, is that just a hot spurt? Or can he carry it forward? Now we've seen him carry it forward. I think it is one of the more amazing things, a testament to his work ethic, a testament. Let's give some credit, right? We've had frustrations on Royals, young players coming up and not being able to hit, and they've obviously unlocked all of his potential. First, the most credit goes obviously to Salvador Perez for doing the work, but it is rewarding when you get a guy who wants to be a Royal, is a hometown guy that you developed, and you can watch his career really blossom. And I give credit to Dayton Moore as well, not just for developing the player, but Dayton Moore, I think, understood that there needs to be a love affair in small market baseball between the fans and the team, but also the team and the fans. And there's certainly that with Salvador Perez. And I think, even though I know attendance has lagged, and it always will when the team's not winning, but I think there is truly a love affair between organization and fans and organization. And it comes from having guys like Salvador Perez. Dayton Moore said, there will be guys that you can buy a jersey or buy a t-shirt and know that they are going to be here. And Salvador Perez has been that guy. I think he probably miscalculated. I don't think there'll be as many as he thought. I think he would have told you he was going to be able to keep Eric Hosmer in a Royals uniform. And based on the season he's had, maybe people would say probably pretty good for the price the Padres paid that he's not here. And to his credit, there was a point where he wouldn't just pay to back that statement up. But I do think that Salvador Perez is going to be one of the great Royals of all time. Dayton Moore said to me in spring training last year, or this year, I think actually, that Salvador Perez is one of those guys he expects to age well like a Nelson Cruz, that his swing path and his preparation and what he does, he should be able to hit well into his 30s. And that's why they gave him the $84 million. That 4-year contract kicks in next year. And man, Salvador Perez made him look pretty smart this year by having the kind of season he's had. And so, yeah, and that just makes the decision to hold on to him look that much better. And really, certainly having Nick Prado, MJ Melendez, and Bobby Witt Jr. Be on the right track, because Melendez and Prado looked like lost causes their last full season in the minor leagues. To get them going back in the right direction, now you can understand it makes more sense to hang on to hang on to Whit Merrifield and Salvador Perez and have some veteran experience around the young players that are coming up. And I think there's, this to me looks like 2012. And next year should be an above 500 year. The following year should be a year that the team is ready to challenge for a World Series.
Folks, that's Soren Petro. A lot more we could talk about. We're going to have you back on. Can't wait to do that. But you can listen to Soren every day from 2 to 6 p.m. on the program on 810 WHB. Soren, it's always great to have you stop by. We look forward to doing it again in person at the Westport Flea Market. So thanks for stopping in.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. Always my pleasure.
All right. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. And we look forward to seeing you next week on Tuesday at noon. Goodbye, everybody.